Hi, Obvious. I hope you enjoy your lurk. Yeah, I need to change my Nightbot command because it's not a mod yet. Or it's a mod, but it's not a sub yet, so I can't use the little lurk icon. But I can put it up right here. So that's what was supposed to show at the end of that. I'm glad I got to make it to the end of your stream today. It was fun. It's fun hearing other people talking about, the things that you've read and stuff, kind of like a little book club, I guess. I'm going to switch over to this thing right here. So welcome back to Storytime, everybody. And I am Sunny, of course. We are continuing with the haunted house, and just a little refresher here. So this is a story that Charles Dickens kind of wrote the skeleton to. He set the basis up for it. Unfortunately, people only know it as a Charles Dickens book, but he actually collaborated with some of his writer friends. So the very first chapter setting up the story of the guy who comes to this dilapidated old house that has been rumored to have ghosts in it. He can't keep any staff because they're all afraid of the ghosts. So his sister comes up with the idea that a bunch of their friends could come and, just do all the housework themselves. What a novel idea. And that, the base of the story takes place around Christmas time. So that is why it is a Christmas book in my eyes. And all of the guests tell their stories of their haunting experiences and all of that stuff. So I don't remember who the first author was that we heard the story from, but I think that Elizabeth Dalhouse? Who was the other one that, no, not Dalhouse. I don't know. We'll find out. But also I wanted to tell you about in the coming weeks, here, I'll post this up in this stream here. So as it says, I'm doing some Christmas art, and it is, it doesn't say on there Christmas, but it's festive. It has stockings and presents and snockings and maestro. And yes, Snocking's name did come from me saying the word stockings, so that's the root of her name. Anyways, I'm going to be putting in people's names for subs and people who've donated bits and donated money towards the new mic that I'm hoping to get, which is a Yeti Nano, and it looks really cool, and I love the blue. And so, of course, people who are already subs will get their names on the stockings already, and Wholesome Chaotic, who is our top bits person, gets their name, gets his name on the nice list. That's right, that's what it was. I could have just gone ahead and read it. So I will be doing an art stream where I'll be coloring in the art, and also coming up this month, not sure when, probably in a Thursday or two, I'll be doing a present wrapping stream, and that's just me. I'll have I'm trying to get together a good free use Christmas and other holiday, seasonal music mix to play in the background. And I'm just going to be wrapping presents, so you'll have a little bit of ASMR with the crinkling wrapping paper and the folding and the tape and all of that stuff, and just chatting with you guys, hanging out. And I just realized I have 2 more presents I need to get, because I have 2 uncles who are apparently going to be coming for Christmas at my parents', but I won't be going to my parents because they are much older than my sister and me, and, in that case, more susceptible to getting sick. And I work retail, So I'm around a lot of people, even though, we sanitize all the time, we wash our hands all the time, we're always wearing masks, we're doing limited number of people in the store. I still want to be careful, and I don't want my family to catch anything. And my sister works with a whole bunch of anti-maskers, unfortunately, so that's why we're being extra careful and not connecting with our family. But of course, we will be bringing by our presents already wrapped that they can put under their tree and unwrap themselves on Christmas Day. So, do any of you guys have any fun holiday plans? Really quickly gonna check on some things. It's my very, very long introduction and, filling you in on what's coming up. Oh, and of course, Christmas Eve night, I'm hoping to do like a late night stream. Definitely going to do A Visit from St. Nick's by Clement Moore, because how could you not? And I don't know how long it would take me to read aloud A Christmas Carol. I might do that in like 2 different installments. We'll see. I'll read some of it aloud to Maestro and see how long that takes. Alright, so I'm going to hide my little meowing Maestro, and we'll go ahead and get started on the story. Chapter: The Ghost in the Double Room by George Augustus Sala. Was the next ghost on my list. I had noted the rooms down in the order in which they were drawn, and this was the order we were to follow. I invoked the spectre of the double room with the least possible delay, because we all observed John Herschel's wife to be much affected, and we all refrained, as if by common consent, for glancing at one another. Alfred Starling, with the tact and good feeling which are never wanting in him, briskly responded to my call and declared the double room to be haunted by the ghost of the Og. "What is the ghost of the Og like?" asked everyone, when there had been a laugh. "Like?" said Alfred. "Like the Og." "What is the Og like?" asked somebody. "Don't you know?" said Alfred. "I'll tell you." We had both, Tilly, by much affectionate diminutive, I mean my adorable Matilda, and your humble servant agreed that it was not only inexpedient, but in the highest degree contrary to the duty we owed to the community at large, to wait any longer. I had 100 arguments to bring forward against the baleful effects of long engagements, until I began to quote poetry of a morbid tendency. Our parents and guardians entertained different positions. My uncle Bonzer wanted us to wait till the shares in the Caerleon upon Usk, something or other company, in which undertaking I was vicariously interested, were at a premium. They have been at a hopeless discount for years. Tilly's papa and mama called Tilly a girl and self a boy, when we were nothing whatsoever the kind, and only the most ardent and faithful pair of young lovers that had existed since the time of Abelard and Eloise, or Florio and Biancafiore. As, however, our parents and guardians were not made of adamant or Roman cement, we were not permitted to add another couple to the catalogue of historically unfortunate lovers. Uncle Bonzer and Mr. and Mrs. Captain Standfast, my Tilly's papa and mamma, at last relented, much as affected towards this desirable consummation by my arguments towards celibacy, contained in 8 pages foolscap, and of which I made copies in triplicate for the benefit of our hard-hearted relatives. More was done by Tilly threatening to poison herself. Most, however, was accomplished by our both making up our minds to tell a piece thereof of our parents and guardians, and telling them if they did not acquiesce in our views, we would run away and get married at the very first opportunity. There was no just cause or impediment. We were young, healthy, and had plenty of money between us. Loads of money, as we thought then. As to personal appearance, Tilly was simply lovely, and my whiskers had not been ill spoken of in best society in Dover. So it was all arranged, and on the 27th of December, 1850, being the morrow of Boxing Day, Alfred Starling, Gent, was to be united in the holy bonds of matrimony to Matilda, only daughter of Captain Rockley Standfast, R.N., of Snargateston Villa, Dover. I had been left an orphan at a very early age, and the guardian of my moderate property, including the shares in the Caerleon upon Usk something or other concern, and guardian of my person, was my uncle Bonser. He sent me to merchant tailors, and afterwards for a couple of years to college at Bonn on the Rhine. He afterwards, to keep me out of mischief, I believe, paid a handsome premium for my entrance into the counting house of Messrs. Baum, Brom, and Boompagees. Okay, that is a very interesting name, Boompagees. German merchants of Finsbury Circus, under whose tutelage I did as little as I liked in the corresponding department, and was much envied by my brother's salaried clerks. My uncle Bonser resided chiefly at Dover, where he was making large sums of money by government contracts, whose objects apparently consisted in boring holes in the chalk and then filling them up again. My uncle was perhaps the most respectable man in Europe, and was well known in the city of London as Responsible Bonser. He was one of those men who are confidently said to be good for any amount. He had a waistcoat, worn winter and summer, a waistcoat that wavered in hue between a sunny buff and a stony drab, which looked so ineffably respectable that I am certain that if it had been presented at the pay counter of any bank in Lombard Street, the clerks would have cashed it at once for any amount of notes or gold demanded. My uncle Bonser entrenched himself behind this astonishing garment as behind a fortification, and fired guns of respectability at you. That waistcoat had carried resolutions, assuaged the ire of indignant shareholders, given stability to wavering schemes, and brought in thumping subscriptions for burnt-out Caffres and destitute Fijis. It was a safe waistcoat, and Bonser was a safe man. He was mixed up with a good many companies, but whenever a projection or promoter came to him with a plan, But whenever a projector or promoter came to him with a plan, my responsible uncle would confer with his waistcoat, and within 5 minutes would either tell the projector or promoter to walk out of his counting house, or put his name down for £1,000. And the scheme was made that Responsible Bonser put his name down for. It was arranged that I was to go down to Dover on Christmas Eve, staying at my uncle's, and that we were to dine all together at Captain Standfast's on Christmas Day. Boxing Day was to be devoted to bonnets on the part of my beloved, and to the signing and sealing of certain releases, deeds, covenants, and other documents connected with the law and money on the part of self, my uncle, and my prospective papa-in-law, and on the 27th we were to be married. Of course, my connection with Messrs. Baum, Brom, and Broomcheese was brought to an amicable termination. I gave the clerks a grand treat at a hostelry in Newgate Street, and had the pleasure of receiving, at a somewhat late hour, and at least 87 times, a unanimous choral assurance, not unaccompanied by hiccups, that I was jolly good fellow. I was unwillingly compelled to defer my departure for Dover till the 8:30 p.m. express mail on Christmas Eve, being engaged to a farewell dinner at 4, at the mansion of our Mr. Max Broomcheese, Jr. and dinner-giver partner in the firm, in Finsbury Circus. A capital dinner it was, and very merry. I left the gentlemen over their wine, and had just time to pop into a cab and catch the mail train to London Bridge. You know how quickly time passes on a railway journey when one has dined comfortably before starting. I seem to have been telegraphed down to Dover so rapidly were the 80-odd miles skimmed over. But it now becomes my duty to impart to you the knowledge of my terrible misfortune. In my youth, a little boy at a preparatory school near Ashford, I had experienced a touch of the dreadful disease of the Kentish marshes. How long this malady had lain concealed in my frame, and by what accidents of time or temperature it became again evolved, I had no means of judging, but by the time the train arrived at Dover, I was in the throes of acute ague. It was a horrible, persistent, regular shivering and shaking, a racking palsy, a violent tremor, accompanied, I am sure, by fever, for my temples throbbed, and I experienced an almost deafening, jarring, rattling noise in the head. My blood seemed all in revolt and surging backwards and forwards in my vein, and my unhappy body swayed from side to side with a distempered current. On the platform I staggered to and fro, and the porter, of whose arms I caught hold to steady myself, seemed, lantern and all, by mere communicated violence, to be shaken and buffeted about as I was. I had always been an abstemious young man, and had not exceeded in the consumption of the hospitable junior partner's rare old hock. Besides, for all the noise in my head, I could think and talk, albeit my teeth chattered and my tongue wagged in my mouth like with aguish convulsions. I had never known before that railway porters were a hard-hearted race, but one tall man in velveteen grinned most impertinently as I was helped into a fly, and I am certain that his companion, a short fat fellow with a leer in his eyes, thrust his tongue into his cheek as he heaped, and at my desire, great coats and rugs over me, and bade the flyman drive at the Marine Parade, where my uncle resided. I had told every one at the station about my attack of ague. "He's got his load," I heard the tall porter exclaim as we drove off. Of course he meant that the flyman had got all my luggage. It was a dreadful 5 minutes' ride to my uncle's. The fit was so strong on me that my head and limbs kept bumping against opposite sides of the fly, and once came in contact with a window glass, and the noise in my head never ceased. I stumbled out somehow when the vehicle stopped, and, clinging to the knocker of the avuncular door, struck such a quivering peal of blows. I had previously scattered the cabman's fare on the pavement in the attempt to place the money in his hand, that Jakes, my uncle's confidential man, who opened the door, shared with astonishment. I'm very ill, Jakes," I stammered, when I had staggered into the hall. "I'm down with that dreadful ague again." "Yes, sir," answered Jakes, with something like a grin in his countenance, too. "Comps of the season, sir. Hadn't you better go to bed, sir?" Now the house was all lighted up, for there was to be a snapdragon party, and I knew that my Tilly and all the standfasts were upstairs with my uncle and his waistcoat, and they were here to wait for my arrival before lighting the bowl. And ill as I was, I burned to see my darling. "No, Jakes," I said, "I'll try and bear up. You had better bring me a little cognac and some very hot water into the dining room. It will do me good, and the fit may leave me." What would you believe was the reply of this pampered domestic? "Better not, sir." He had the hardihood to observe. "Christmas time, sir. Plenty more for you. Better go to bed, sir. Think of your head in the morning, sir." "Fellow," I began to retort, still violently trembling, when I saw my Uncle Bonzer appear at the head of the staircase. There was a group of ladies and gentlemen in the background, and, as well as I could see for shaking there, were the dear golden curls of my Tilly, but her face looked so scared and terrified.
"Alfred," said my uncle sternly from behind his waistcoat, "you ought to be ashamed of yourself. Go to bed directly, sir." "Uncle," I cried, with a desperate attempt to keep myself steady, "do you think I'm—" Here I made an effort to ascend the stairs, but my foot caught either in the carpet or over one of the confounded brass rods, and, upon my word, I tumbled head over heels into the hall, and yet, even as I lay recumbent, I shook worse than ever. I heard my uncle's responsible voice ordering the servants to carry me to bed. And I was carried too, Jakes and a long-legged foot-page conveying my shaking body to my bedroom. The night was brief and terrible, as in an excess of fever, and I lay shaking and chattering in the burning bed. In the morning my uncle sent word to say that my ague was all nonsense and that I was to come down to breakfast. I went down, determined on remonstrance, but holding on by the banisters and quavering in every limb. Oh, for the tribulations that wretched Christmas Day! I was received with sneers and advised to take very strong tea with a little cognac, yet soon afterwards my uncle shook hands with me and said that it was only once a year and that he supposed boys would be boys. Everybody wished me a Merry Christmas, but I could only return the compliments of the season in a spasmodic stutter. I took a walk on the pier immediately after breakfast, but I nearly tumbled into the sea and bumped against so many posts that I had to be led home by a mariner in a yellow sou'western hat, who insisted that I should give him 5 shillings to drink my health. Then came a more appalling order. I was to call at Snargateston Villa to accompany my Tilly and the family to church. To my great relief, though I was shaking in every joint of my fingers and toes, nobody took any notice of my alarming complaint. I began to hope that it might be intermittent and would pass off, but it wouldn't, and rather increased in violence. My darling girl patted me on the head and hoped that I was a good boy now, but when I began, shiveringly, to explain my attack of ague, she only laughed. She went to church, and then my ague soon brought me into disgrace again. First I created terrible scandal by knocking up against the old pauper woman in the free seats, and nearly upsetting the beadle. Beadle. I don't remember what the position means. Well, it's a person who's called a beadle. Then I knocked the church service and hymn books off the ledge of the pew. Then I kicked a hassock from beneath the very knees of my future mamma-in-law. Then I trod accidentally, I declare, on the toes of Mary Seton, my Tilly's pretty cousin, whereupon she gave a little scream, and my beloved looked daggers at me, and as a climax, in the agony of that extraordinary horizontal shaking fit of mine, I burst the pew door open and tumbled once more against the beadle, who in stern tones, and in the name of the churchwardens, desired me either to behave myself or to leave the church. I saw that it was no good contending against my complaint, so I did leave. But as I lurched out of the edifice, I seemed to see the clergyman shaking in the reading desk, and the clerk wagging to and fro beneath him, while the hatchments and tablets shook on the wall, and the organ in the gallery kept bumping now against the charity boys, now against the charity girls. It wasn't vertigo. The head swims round under that circumstances. It was clearly ague, and of the very worst description, the body shaking from left to right, and the blood surging in the ears with fever. At dinner time my agonies had never ceased, but had not attracted notice. I began literally to put my foot into it again. First, handing Mrs. Van Plank of Sandwich down to the dining-room, my Uncle Bonzer escorted Tilly. I entangled myself in the bugle ornaments which that wealthy but obese woman persisted in wearing, and we came down together with alarming result. I was undermost, shaking miserably, with Mrs. Van Plank's large person pressing on my shirt studs. When we were assisted to rise, She would not be appeased. She would not join us at dinner. She ordered her fly and returned to Sandwich, and as the carriage drove away, Captain Standfast, R.N., looked at me as savagely as though he would have liked to have me up at the gangway and give me 6 dozen on the instant, said, "There goes poor Tilly's diamond bracelet. The old screw won't give it to her now. I saw the case on the cushion of the fly." Was it my fault? Was it my fault? Could I help my lamentable Og? At dinner, I went from bad to worst. Item: I spilt 2 ladles full of mock turtle soup over a new damask tablecloth. Item: I upset a glass of Madeira over Mary Seaton's blue moire dress. I guess it's moire. Item: in a convulsive fit of shaking, I nearly stabbed Lieutenant Lamb of 54th Regiment, stationed on the heights, with a silver fork. And finally, in a maniacal attempt to carve a turkey, I sent the entire body of that Christmas bird, with a garland of sausages clinging to it, full butt into the responsible waistcoat of my Uncle Bonzer. The peace was made somehow. I'm sure I don't know in what manner, but half an hour afterwards we were all very pleasant and talkative over our dessert. When I say all, I of course exempt my unhappy self. There had been no solution of continuity in my shaking. Somebody, I think, proposed my health. In returning thanks, I hit the Prosper a tremendous blow under the left eye with my elbow. Endeavoring to regain my equilibrium, I sent a full glass of claret into the embroidered cambric bosom of that unhappy Lieutenant Lamb. In desperation, I caught hold of the tablecloth with both hands. I saw how it would be. The perfidious, polished mahogany slid away from my grasp. I turned my foot frantically round the leg of the table nearest me, and with a great crash over went dining table, cut glass decanters, and dessert. Lieutenant Lamb was badly hit across the bridge of the nose with a pair of silver nutcrackers, and my Uncle Bonzer's head was crowned in quite a classic manner with filberts and hothouse grapes. The bleak December sun rose next morning upon ruin and catastrophe. As well as I can collect my scattered reminiscences of that dismal time, my offences against decorum were once more condoned. Not in consequence of my complaint, in which my relatives and friends persisted in disbelieving, but on the ground that it was only once a year. Lawyers came backwards and forwards to Snargetstone Villa during the forenoon. There was a great production of tin boxes, red tape, blue seals, foolscap paper, and parchment, and my Uncle Bonzer was more responsible than ever. They brought me a paper to sign at last, whispering much among themselves as they did so, and I protest that I could see nothing but a large pool of white jogging about in a field of green tablecloth, while on the paper an infinity of crabbed characters seemed racing up and down in a crazed and furious manner. I endeavored to nerve myself to the task of signing. I bit my lips. I clenched my left hand. I tried to screw my wagging head onto my neck. I cramped my toes up in my boots. I held my breath. But was it my fault when I clutched the pen and tried to write my name that the abominable goose quill began to dance and skate and leap and plunge and dig its nibs into the paper? When, in despair, I seized the inkstand to hold it nearer to the pen, I shook its sable contents in horrid, horned, tasseled blots all over the grave legal document. I finished my achievement by inflicting a large splash in my uncle's sacred waistcoat and hitting Captain Standfast under the third rib with the pen. "That will do," my papa-in-law cried, collaring me. "Leave the house, scoundrel!"
But I broke from his grasp and fled to the drawing-room, knowing that my Tilly would be there with her bridesmaids and her bonnets. Tilly, my adored Matilda, I cried. No further explanation is needed, sir, broke in my beloved in an inexorable tone. I have seen and heard quite enough. Alfred Starling, I would sooner wed the meanest hind that gathered samphire on yon cliff than become the bride of a profligate and drunkard. Go, sir. Repent if you can, be ashamed if you can. Henceforth we are strangers, slave of self-indulgence, adieu forever. And she swept out of the room, and I could hear her sobbing her pretty heart out in the boudoir beyond. I was discarded and expelled forever from Snargetston Villa. My Uncle Bonzer repudiated me and disinherited me from any shares in his waistcoat. I hurled myself into the next train at the station and shook all the way back to town. At about dusk on that dreadful Boxing Day, I found myself wandering and jolting about the purlieus of Soho. From Soho Square, southwest side, I think, branches a shabby, dingy little court called Bateman's Buildings. I was standing shivering at the corner of this ill-favored place when I stumbled against a gentleman who looked about 7/8 soldier and 1/8 civilian. He was a little dapper, clean-limbed, young-looking old man with a yellow face and gray hair and whiskers. Soldiers, save in the cavalry, didn't wear mustaches then. He wore a blue uniform coat, rather white at the seams, and a silver medal with a faded ribbon on his breast. He had a bunch of party-colored streamers in his undressed cap. He carried a bamboo cane under his arm. On each sleeve he wore golden stripes, much tarnished. On his scarlet collar was embroidered a golden lion, and on his shoulders he had a pair of little light golden epaulettes that very much resembled 2 sets of teeth from a dentist's glass case covered with bullion. "And how are you, my hearty?" said the military gentleman cheerily. I answered that I was the most miserable wretch in the world, upon which the military gentleman, slapping me on the back and calling me his gallant comrade, asked me to have a pint of beer, warmed with a little spice, and a dash of Old Tom in it, for the sake of Christmas. "You're a roving buck," observed my new friend. "I'm a roving buck. You never happened to have a twin brother named Sif, did you?" "No," I answered moodily. "He was as like you as 2 peas," continued the military gentleman, who had by this time taken my arm, and was leading me all shaking and clattering towards a mouldy little tavern, on whose door-jambs were displayed a couple of coloured cartoons, framed and glazed and much fly-blown, and displaying the one the presentiment of an officer in blue-sky uniform, much belaced with silver, and the other a bombardier with an enormous shako ramming the charges into a cannon, the whole surmounted by a placard setting forth that smart young men were required for the Honourable East India Company's infantry, cavalry, and artillery, and earnestly exhorting all smart young men, as aforesaid, to apply forthwith to Sergeant Major Chutney, who was always to be heard of at the bar of the Highland Laddie, or of the office in Bateman's Buildings. "The last time I saw him," went on the man with the yellow face and the grey whiskers, when he had tilted me into the Highland Laddie, pinned me, shaking against the bar counter, and ordered a pint of sophisticated beer, he had left our service, and was a field marshal in the army of the King of Oude. Many is the time I've seen him with his cocked hat and diamond epaulettes riding on a white elephant, with 25 black fellows running along after to brush the flies away and draw the soda-water corks. Such brandy he'd have with it, and all through meeting me promiscuous in this very public. And very quickly. Oh, come on. There we go. Just a reminder of the disclaimer. This is more than 100 years old, so there may be terms that, if I don't catch them in time to change them or correct them, are offensive or, don't mean the same thing. And I try to remember that. I try to change definitely the worst ones. Let's see. Such brandy he'd have with it, and all through meeting me promiscuous in this very public. It is useless to prolong the narrative of my conversation with the military gentleman. Suffice it to say that within an hour I had taken the fatal shilling and enlisted in the service of the Honourable East India Company. I was not a beggar. I possessed property over which my Uncle Bonzer had no control. I had not committed any crime, but I felt lost, ruined, and desperate, and I enlisted. For a wonder, when I was brought before a magistrate to be arrested, and before a surgeon to be examined respecting my sanitary fitness for the service, my ague seemed entirely to have left me. I stood firm and upright in the witness box and under the measuring standard, and was only deterred by shame and anguish at the misconstruction put upon my conduct at Dover from negotiating for my discharge. I had scarcely reached the East India recruiting depot at Brentwood, however, before the attacks of ague returned with redoubled severity. At first, on my stating that I had an ear for music, they began to train me for a bandsman, but I could not keep a wind instrument in my hands, and struck those that were playing by my comrades from their grasp. Then it was put into the awkward squad among the recruiters, and the sergeants caned me, but I could never get beyond the preliminary drill of the goose step, and I kept my own time, and not the squad's even then. The depot surgeons wouldn't place the slightest credence in my ague, and the sergeant major of my company reported that I was a skulking, malingering impostor among my comrades who despised without pitying me. I got the nickname of Young Shivery Shakery, and the most wonderful thing is that, although I could have procured remittances at any time, the thought of purchasing my discharge never entered my poor shaking, jarring head. How they came to send such a trembling, infirm creature as a soldier to India, I can't make out, but sent I was by long sea in a troop ship with 700 or 800 more recruits. My military career in the East came to a very speedy and inglorious termination. We had scarcely arrived at Bombay when the battalion of the European regiment into which I was drafted was sent up country to the banks of the Sutlej, where the Sikh War was then raging. It was the campaign of Aliwal and Sobraon, but it was very little that I saw of that glorious epoch in our military annals. In contemptuous reference to my nervous disorder, I was only permitted to form part of the baggage guard, and one night, after perhaps 10 days' march, throughout which I had shaken most awfully, an attack was made on our rear for mere purposes of plunder by a few rascally budmarshes or thieves. Nothing was easier than to put these paltry scoundrels to the rout. I had been brave enough as a lad and as a young man. I declare that on the present occasion I didn't run away, but my unhappy disease got the mastery of me. I shook my musket out of my hands, my shako off my head, and my knapsack off my back, and my wretched legs shook and jolted me, as it seems, over miles of arid country. There was some talk of shooting me afterwards, and some of flogging me, but corporal punishment did not exist in the company's army. They sent me to a vile place of incarceration called a Kanji house. Where am I again? Sorry. They sent me to a vile place of incarceration called a Kanji house, where I was fed principally on rice water, and at last I was conveyed to Bombay. Tried by court-martial, sentenced and publicly drummed out of my regiment as a private property, had the facing cut off my uniform, and, to the sound of the Rogue's March, was dismissed from the service of the Honourable East India Company with ignominy and disgrace. I can scarcely tell how I reached England again, whether a berth was given me, whether I paid for it, or whether I worked my passage home. I can only remember that the ship in which I was a passenger broke her back in Algoa Bay, close to the Cape, and became a total wreck. There was not the slightest danger. We were surrounded by large and small craft, and every soul on board was saved. But I shook so terribly and incessantly while the boats were leaving the vessel that the whole ship's company hooted and groaned at me when I was shoved over the side, and I was not allowed to go in the longboat, but was towed alone and aft in the dinghy to shore. I took passage in another ship, which did nothing but shake all the way from the Cape to Plymouth, and at last I reached England. I wrote innumerable letters to my friends and relatives, to Tilly and to my Uncle Bonzer, but the only answer I received was a few formal lines from my uncle's lawyer, telling me that my illegal scrawlings had come to the hands of the persons for whom they were designed, but that no further notice could be taken of my communications. I was put into the possession of my property to the last penny, but it seems to me that I must have shaken it away either at dice or bagatelle, or ninepins or billiards, and I remember that I never made a stroke at the latter game without hitting my adversary with a cue in the chest, knocking down the marker, sending the balls scudding through the windows, disarranging the scores, and cutting holes in the cloth for which I had to pay innumerable guineas to the proprietor of the rooms. I remember one day going into a jewellery shop in Regent Street to purchase a watch key. I had only a silver one now. My gold repeater had been shaken away in some unaccountable manner. It was winter-time, and I wore a waistcoat with long, loose sleeves. While the shopkeeper was adjusting a key to my watch, my ague fit came upon me with demoniacal ferocity, and to my horror and dismay, in catching hold of the corner to save myself, I tilted a tray of diamond rings over. Some fell on the floor, but some, oh, horror and anguish, fell into the sleeves of my overcoat. I shook so that I seemed to have shaken diamond rings into my hands, my pockets, and my very boots. By some uncontrollable impulse I attempted flight, but was seized at the very shop door and carried, shaking, to the police station. I was taken before a magistrate and committed, still shaking, in a van to gaol. I shook for some time in a whitewashed cell, when I was brought up, shaking, to the Central Criminal Court, and placed, shaking, on my trial for an attempted robbery of £1,500 worth of property. The evidence was clear against me. My counsel tried to plead something about kleptomania, but in vain. My Uncle Bonzer, who had come expressly up from Dover, spoke strongly against my character. I was found guilty. Yes, I, the most innocent and unfortunate young man breathing, and sentenced to 7 years' transportation. I can recall the awful scene vividly to memory now. The jury in a body were shaking their heads at me. So was the judge. So was my Uncle Bonzer. So were the spectators in the gallery, and I was holding on by the spikes on the ledge of the docks, shaking from right to left, and 10,000 million aspen leaves. My skull was splitting, my brain was bursting, when I woke. I was laying in a very uncomfortable position in a first-class carriage of the Dover mail train. Everything in the carriage was shaking. The oil was surging to and fro in the lamp. My companions were swaying to and fro, and the sticks and umbrellas were rattling in the network above. The train was at speed, and my frightful dream was simply due to the violent and unusual oscillation of the train. Then, sitting up and rubbing my eyes, immensely relieved, for holding on by the compartments near me. So violently did the carriages shake from side to side, I began to remember that I had dreamed or heard of others' dreams while at sea, or while somebody was knocking loudly at the door, and of the odd connections between unusual sound and motion on the thoughts of our innermost souls. And again, with odd distinctness, I remember that at one period of my distempered vision, namely, when I was arrested and examined as a recruit, I had remained perfectly still and steady. This temporary freedom from Og I was fain to ascribe to the customary 2 or 3 minutes stoppage of the train at Tunbridge Wells. But, thank heaven, all this was but a dream. Enough to shake one's head off, exclaimed the testy old lady opposite, alluding to the oscillation of the train, as the guard appeared at the window with a shout of "Dover!" "Well, mum, it have been a shaking most unusual all the way down," replied the functionary. "Thought we should have a been off the line more than once. Screws will be looked to tomorrow morning. Right, sir." This was to me. I knew the man well. "Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. You'll be wanting to fly to Snargetston Village, won't you, sir?" "Now, porter!" I did want that fly, and I had it. I paid the driver liberally, and did not scatter his money over the pavement. Mr. Jakes insisted on my having something hot in the dining-room the moment I arrived. The weather was not woundy cold, he said. I joined the merry party upstairs, and was received by my Tilly with open arms, and by my Uncle Bonzer with an open waistcoat. I partook in cheerful moderation of the snapdragon festivities of Christmas Eve. We all dined together on Christmas Day, and I helped the soup and carved a turkey beautifully, and on the morrow, Boxing Day, was complimented by my uncle's lawyer on my remarkably neat calligraphy, as displayed in the signatures to the necessary legal documents. On the 27th of December, 1846, I was married to my darling Tilly, and was going to live happily ever after, when I woke again. Really did wake in bed in this haunted house, and found that I had been very much shaken on the railway coming down, and that there was no marriage, no Tilly, no Mary Seton, no Van Plank, no anything but myself and the ghost of the Og, and the 2 inner windows of the double room rattling like the ghosts of 2 departed watchmen who wanted spiritual assistance to carry me to the dead and gone old watch-house. That was a very interesting one. So I am guessing that the ghost of the Og, that was the ghost's memory or something? Not really sure. So I think it looks like we're doing 2 chapters today. Chapter, The Ghost in the Picture Room by Adelaide Ann Proctor. Oh, this looks to be in verse, so we'll see how this goes. Belinda, with a modest self-possession quite her own, promptly answered for this spectre in a low, clear voice. The lights extinguished by the hearth I leant, half weary with a listless content. The flickering giant shadows gathering near closed around me with a dim and silent fear. All dull, all dark, save when the leaping flame, glancing, lit up the picture's ancient frame. Above the hearth it hung, perhaps the night, by foolish tremors or the gleaming light, lent power to that portrait dark and quaint, a portrait such as Rembrandt loves to paint, the likeness of a nun. I seemed to trace a world of sorrow in the patient face, in the thin hands folding across her breast. Its own and the room's shadow hid the rest. I gazed and dreamed, and the dull embers stirred, till an old legend that I once had heard came back to me, linked to the mystic gloom of the dark picture in the ghostly room. In far south, where clustering vines are hung, where first the old chivalric lay, In the far south, where clustering vines are hung, where first the old chivalric lays were sung, there were earliest smiled that gracious child of France, angel and knight and fairy, called Romance. I stood one day. The warm blue June was spread upon the earth, blue summer overhead, without a cloud to fleck its radiant glare, without a breath to stir its sultry air. All still, all silent, save the sobbing rush of rippling waves that lapsed in silver hush upon the beach, where glittering towards the strand, the purple Mediterranean kissed the sand. All still, all peaceful, when a convent chime broke in on the midday silence for a time. Then, trembling into quiet, seemed to cease in deeper silence and more utter peace. So as I turned to gaze, while gleaming white, half hid by shadowy trees from passing sight, the convent lay, one who had dwelt for long in that fair home of ancient tale and song. Who knew the story of each cave and hill, and every haunting fancy lingering still within the land, spake thus to me and told the convent's treasured legend, quaint and old. Long years ago, a dense and flowering wood, still more concealed, where the white convent stood, borne on its perfumed wings the title came. Our Lady of the Hawthorns is its name. Then did that bell, which still rings out today, bid all the country rise, or eat, or pray. Before that convent shrine, the haughty knight passed the lone vigil of his perilous fight. For humbler cottage strife or village brawl, the abscess listened, prayed, and settled all. Young hearts that came, weighed down by love or wrong, left her kind presence comforted and strong. Each passing pilgrim and each beggar's right was food and rest and shelter for the night. But more than this, the nuns could well impart the deepest mysteries of the healing art. Their stores of herbs and simples were renowned, and held in wondering faith for miles around. Thus strife, love, sorrow, good and evil fate found help and blessing at the convent gate. Of all the nuns no heart was half so light, no eyelids veiling, glancing half as bright, no step that glided with such noiseless feet, no face that looked so tender and so sweet, no voice that rose in choir so pure, so clear, no heart to all the others half so dear. So, surely touched by others' pain or woe, guessing the griefs of young life could not know, no soul in childlike faith so undefiled as Sister Angela's, the convent child. For thus they loved to call her. She had known no home, no love, no kindred save her own. An orphan to their tender nursing given, child, plaything, pupil, now the bride of heaven. And she it was who trimmed the lamp's red light that swung before the altar day and night. I believe the red light is, in some churches, there is a red light that never goes out. They have, like, I guess, a backup generator in the electrical ones, and it's supposed to be like the eternal love flame to represent the eternal love of God or Jesus or something like that. I don't really remember. It's been a long time. Let's see. And she it was who trimmed the lamp's red light that swung before the altar day and night. Her hands it was whose patient skill could trace the finest broidery, weave the costliest lace, but most of all, her first and dearest care, the office she would never miss or share, was every day to weave fresh garlands sweet to place before the shrine at Mary's feet. Nature is bounteous in that region fair, for even winter has her bosom there. Thus Angela loved to count each feast the best, by telling with what flowers the shrine was dressed, In pomp and supreme the restless roses passed, battalion on battalion thronging fast, each with a different banner, flaming bright, damask or striped or crimson, pink or white, until they bowed before the newborn queen, and the pure virgin lay rose serene. Though Angela always thought the mother blessed, must love the time of her own hawthorns best, each evening through the year, with equal care she placed her flowers, then kneeling down in prayer as their faint perfume rose before the shrine. So rose her thoughts, as pure and as divine. She knelt until the shades grew dim without, till one by one the altar lights shone out. Till one by one the nuns, like shadows dim, gathered round to chant their vesper hymn. Her voice then led the music's winged flight, and Ave Maria Stella filled the night. But wherefore linger on those days of peace? When storms draw near, then quiet hours must cease. War, cruel war, defaced the land, and came so near the convent with its breath of flame, that, seeking shelter, frightened peasants fled, sobbing out tales of coming fear and dread, till after a fierce skirmish down the road, one night came straggling soldiers with their load of wounded, dying comrades, and the band, half pleading, yet as if they could command, summoned the trembling sisters, craved their care, then rode away, and left the wounded there. But soon compassion bade all fear depart, and bidding every sister to do her part, some prepare simples, healing salves, or bands. The abscess chose the more experienced hands to dress the wounds needing most skillful care. Yet even the youngest novice took her share, and thus to Angela, whose ready will and pity could not cover lack of skill, charge of a young wounded knight must fall, a case which seemed most dangerous of all. Day after day she watched beside his bed, and first in utter quiet the hours fled. His feverish moans alone the silence stirred, or her soft voice uttering some pious word. At last the fever left him. Day by day the hours, no longer silent, passed away. What could she speak of? First, to still his plaints, she told him legends of the martyred saints, described the pangs which, through God's plenteous grace, had gained their souls so high and bright a place. This pious artifice soon found success, or so she fancied, for he murmured less, and so she told the pomp and grand array in which the chapels shone on Easter Day, described the vestments, gold and colors bright, counted how many tapers gave their light. Then, in minute detail, went on to say how the high altar looked on Christmas Day, the kings and the shepherds all in green and white, and a large star of jewels gleaming bright. Then told the sign by which they all had seen how even nature loved to greet her queen. For when Our Lady's last procession went down the long garden, every head was bent, and rosary in hand, each sister prayed as the long floating banners were displayed. They struck the hawthorn boughs, and showers of buds and blossoms strewed her way with flowers. The knight, unwearied, listened, till at last he too described the glories of his past, tourney and joust and pageant bright and fair, and all the lovely ladies who were there. But half incredulous she heard, could this be the world, this place of love and bliss? Where then was hid the strange and hideous charm that never failed to bring the gazer harm? She crossed herself, yet asked, and listened still, and still the knight described with all his skill the glorious days of joy, all joys above, transfigured in the golden mist of love. Spread your wings, ye angel guardians bright, and shield those dazzling phantoms from her sight. But no, days passed, Martins and vespers sang, and still the quiet nuns toiled, prayed and sang, and never guessed the fatal coiling net that every day drew near and nearer yet around their darling, for she went and came about her duties, outwardly the same. The same? Ah, no, even when she knelt to pray, some charmed dream kept all her heart away. So days went on until the convent gate opened one night. Who durst go forth so late? Across the moonlit grass with stealthy tread, two silent shrouded figures passed and fled, and all was silent save the morning seas that sobbed and pleaded, and a wailing breeze that sighed among the perfumed hawthorn trees. What need to tell that dream so bright in grief of joy uncheckered by a dread of grief? What need to tell how all such dreams must fade before the slow, foreboding, dreaded shade that floated nearer until pomp and pride, pleasure and wealth were summoned to her side, to bid at last the noisy hours forgot, then clamor down the whispers of regret. Sorry. Still Angela strove to dream, and strove in vain. Awakened once, she could not sleep again. She saw each day and hour more worthless grown the heart for which she cast away her own. And her soul leant, through bitterest inward strife, the slight, frail love for which she wrecked her life, the phantom for which all her hope was given, the cold, bleak earth for which she bartered heaven. But all in vain. What chance remained? What heart would stoop to take so poor an outcast's part? Years fled, and she grew reckless more and more, until the humblest peasant closed his door, and where she passed, fair dames in scorn and pride shuddered and drew their rustling robes aside. At last a yearning seemed to fill her soul, a longing that was stronger than control. Once more, just once again, to see the place that knew her young and innocent, to retrace the long and weary southern path, to gaze upon the heaven of her childish days. Once more beneath the convent roof to lie, once more to look upon her home and die, weary and worn, her comrades' chill remorse and black despair, yet a strange silent force within her heart that drew her more and more. Onward she crawled and begged from door to door. Weighed down with weary days, her failing strength grew less each hour, till one day's dawn at length, as its first rays flooded the world with light, showed the broad waters, glittering blue and bright, and where, amid the leafy hawthorn wood, just as of old in low white convent stood. Would any know her? Nay, no fear. Her face had lost all trace of youth, of joy, of grace, of the pure, happy soul they used to know, the novice Angela, so long ago. She rang the convent bell. The well-known sound smote on her heart and bowed her to the ground. And she, who had not wept for long, dry years, felt the strange rush of unaccustomed tears. Terror and anguish seemed to check her breath and stop her heart. Oh God, could this be death? Crouching against the iron gate she laid, her weary head against the bars, and prayed. But nearer footsteps drew, then seemed to wait. And then she heard the opening grate, and saw the withered face on which awoke pity and sorrow, as the porter spoke, and asked the stranger's bidding. "Take me in," she faltered. "Sister Monica, for sin and sorrow and despair that will not cease. Oh, take me in, and let me die in peace." With soothing words the sister bade her wait till she brought the key to unbar the gate. The beggar tried to thank her as she lay, and heard the echoing footsteps die away. But what soft voice was that which sounded near and stirred strange trouble in her heart to hear? She raised her head. She seemed to know a face that came from long, long years ago. Herself, but yet as when she fled away. the young and blooming novice, fair and gay, but a grave woman, gentle and serene. The outcast knew it, what she might have been. But as she gazed and gazed, a radiance bright filled all the place with strange and sudden light. The nun was there no longer, but instead a figure with a circle round its head, a ring of glory, and a face so meek, so soft, so tender. Angela strove to speak, and stretched her hands out, crying, "Mary mild, Mother of mercy, help me, help your child." And Mary answered, "From thy bitter past, welcome, my child, O welcome home at last. I filled thy place, thy flight is known to none, but all thy daily duties I have done. Gathered thy flowers, and prayed, and sang, and slept. Dost thou not know, poor child, thy place was kept? Kind hearts are here, yet would the tenderest one have limits to its mercy. God has none. And man's forgiveness may be true and sweet, but yet he stoops to give it. More complete is love that lies forgiveness at thy feet, and pleads with thee to raise it. Only heaven means crowded, crowned, not vanquished, when it says forgiven." Back hurried Sister Monica, but where was the poor beggar she had left lying there? Gone, and she searched in vain and sought the place for that wan woman with the piteous face. But only Angela at the gateway stood, laden with hawthorn blossoms from the wood. And never did a day pass by again, but the old portress, with a sigh of pain, would sorrow for her loitering, with a prayer that the poor beggar, in her wild despair, might not have come to any ill. And when she ended, "God forgive her," humbly then did Angela bow her head and say, "Amen." How pitiful her heart was! All could trace something that dimmed the brightness of her face. After that day, which none had seen before, not trouble, but a shadow, nothing more. Years passed away. Then, one dark day of dread, saw all the sisters kneeling round a bed, when Angela lay dying. Every breath struggled beneath the heavy hand of death. Suddenly a flush lit up her cheeks. She raised her wan right hand and strove to speak. In sorrowing love they listened. Not a sound or sigh disturbed the utter silence round. The very taper's flames were scarcely stirred. In such hushed awe the sisters knelt and heard. And through that silence Angela told her life, her sin, her flight, the sorrow and the strife and the return, and then clear, low, and calm, "Praise God for me, my sisters," and the psalm rang up to heaven, far and clear and wide, again and yet again, then sank and died. While her white face had such a smile of peace, they saw she never heard the music cease. The weeping sisters laid her in her tomb, crowned with a wreath of perfumed hawthorn bloom. And thus the legend ended. It may be something is hidden in the mystery. Oh, yeah, I did read that right. And thus the legend ended. It may be something is hidden in the mystery. Besides the lesson of God's pardon, shown never enough believed or asked or known. Have we not all, amid life's pretty strife, some pure ideal of a noble life that once seemed possible? Did we not hear the flutter of its wings and feel it near, and just within our reach? It was, and yet we lost it in this daily jar and fret, and now live idle in a vague regret. But still, our place is kept, and it will wait, ready for us to fill it, soon or late. No star is ever lost we once have seen, and always may be what we might have been. Since good, though only thought has life and breath, God's life can always be redeemed from death, and evil in its nature is decay, and any hour can blot it all away. The hopes that lost in some far distant scene may be the truer life, and this the dream. That was a short chapter, so I'm going to quickly see how many chapters we have left. And I may read one more today. No. So today is going to be a short stream because next stream we have 2 chapters, and one of them is very long. And they are by Wilkie Collins and Elizabeth Gaskell, who I haven't read them personally, but I have heard wonderful things, and they're fairly well-known writers of that time. Wilkie Collins I'm intrigued by because she can write some like spooky, ghostly stuff, so I really want to see what she has to say. I'm gonna get Maestro back up here. Alright, so since we've come to the end of this stream, I am going to... Hi, Corel. How are you doing? I'm just about to end the story time, but I'm going to start up a game stream. And I just downloaded a new game called Mrs. Santa's Gift Hunt. So I may play that just to see what it's like. It's a free game on Steam. So, yeah, we will see what that is all about. It is... I think a new game that came out this year. Yeah, fairly new. Okay. I'll just take a small break. Feel free to, get up and... Oh, I have a new command. I don't know if you had seen it. It's this one right here. About the Christmas art and, having your name put on it and stuff like that. I have the, going to be inking in the outline of it today after my stream. And then I'll probably, probably do other things. I'll probably do the art stream maybe Sunday night. We will see. Anyways, yeah. Feel free to get up, stretch, get yourself a snack or something. I'm going to do a few things and then come back to do a game stream. So I hope you'll stick around. I hope to see you in a little bit. And if not, I will see you next time. Next story time is going to be next Monday, 2 to 4 as usual. And we will be finishing The Haunted House. Alright,